Okay, so now that we know how this elevation can be an animated elevation, let's go and turn it into one that's a little bit more blocky in appearance. And that would be, again, we can start from the timeline in the animation menu. Let's go and find our animation category, animated filters, there they are. And again, let's use the Perlin noise. I don't remember exactly what parameters we had earlier, but it doesn't matter so much. Let's choose this type and perhaps a little bit larger on the scale and render that first sequence. So now we go back to the original image sequence that we are rendering in a 2D Perlin noise. What you see here is just the update of what the old image looks like. Over here you see the new image that's being rendered in replacement. And up here, of course, the timeline showing the entire sequence as well. Alright, so now we need to create that blocky look, and that is done simply, I think it is one of those photographic or transform. Let's see, where's the transform groups? Down there they are. There's the mosaic. Alright, so when you look at the mosaic, you can see you can create a fairly blocky, large blocky appearance. Let's keep them like this, and keep in mind that this is just one frame, but across the frame sequence each pixel is gradually going to change. It's going to go brighter or darker, and that's the nature of this Perlin noise that's animated. So what we have happening here is that the block that we're looking at is sort of an average, or one pixel chosen, and it will change over time. So each of these blocks are going to go through a smooth transition in brightness. It's going to go perhaps all the way down to black and then all the way up to the brightest white possible. And in doing so, it will transition over many frames and create a alternating cycle, if you want, of blocks that go from dark to bright. That is the elevation map we are going to need in order to actually have this set of blocks animated in 3D as well. So let's go and render that. And so here we are now. We can do a quick preview and play the blocks. You can look at any one of those. Let's say, for instance, the one in the upper left corner right there. You see it doesn't go all the way black. The one here to the right of it does get darker, and there are some that go very bright, and some of them get very dark as well. But this is either way a very good set of blocks that are changing in brightness. And so of course we can go now again to the filter with the transform and look for our terrain, the 3D designer, and here's a first look at that using the same parameter that we had before. We can change the depth of it, the amplitude if you want, of that elevation extrusion, how coarse you want it, how finely you want it, and the heading. And once again, if we go and just render that right here as an animation without any further change, or perhaps with a tiny little change on the angle, like the heading for instance, let's give it a 0.5 increase frame to frame. It's now applying that render sequence, again the 3D designer, across each of the frames, which are different from one frame to another. And so as a result of it, now we have the 3D designer that produced this animation, and that's the starting point from of what we're looking. I mean, this is a very simple, straightforward one. Obviously, we can work on the image sequence before we submit them to the 3D designer, and that way we can perhaps have certain streets, certain valleys that stay black, or areas that stay high, and that's one thing that we should experiment with. Let's get right into that. So essentially what I'll do is I'll go back to that animated Perlin noise, maybe this one here, and again it was something like this. Perhaps let's try a different one this time. Let's try this one, and large scale nonetheless. There you go. Okay, and render that. Again, what it's doing right now is it's rendering here the preview of what it is rendering. What you see here on the left side is just the old version that's in the current animation buffer as it's being rendered and replaced. And so here now we have the new animation. And what I'd like to do is again first turn it into a blocky appearance. So if my memory serves me right, there you go. Go to the mosaic filter in the transform and make it fairly blocky. Maybe this time we'll use something. Let's see what the max gives us, something like this. Render that. And this is the starting point from which we want to work. So, by the way, if you want to use this image, this animation sequence a lot, and you don't want to have to recreate it every time, I would certainly recommend that you save it. Save it to a file. It's a very quick animation save, and you can save that to a DWA file that way, without codecs, without compression. It's very fast, and it's essentially going to allow you to get back to it really quickly if you need to get back to it. So, but the idea now is that we could possibly block certain areas from going through the animation. See, right now we have these blocks that are changing in brightness, and maybe some of them we really don't want them to animate. Maybe like the whole border around them should be fixed at the lowest brightness. Or maybe a valley in between, or maybe 2 or 3 vertical columns that are fixed. So I mean, at this point you can just paint over that if you want, or you could do some transforms of a variety of types. One, for instance, let's say if you wanted to single out an area that will need to be dark, the darkest possible, maybe just black, or the darkest one that we have in this particular image. So one thing you could do is go first to the color picker and pick that color right there, so we know what gray values it needs to be. And then maybe this one here is even, no, that one's brighter. So let's choose this one, and then we'll select a rectangular area, something like this, and maybe we'll bring it right there. On the inside, actually, we'll you know what we'll do, we'll make sure the inside can animate and the outside is not animated. The outside is the one that's going to be forced to the gray, the dark gray. So after we've selected this rectangular area, we're going to need to let's select it again, perhaps a little bit more better quality there. Then we need to invert the selection, right? Because if you look at the selection menu right now here and we store the alpha, we can see that right now we have the inside selected, not the outside. So first of all, let's center it a little bit better. There you go. And then invert the selection, and then we can store it just to double check and verify. Where do we have that? Store alpha. So yeah, now we have the white area selected on the outside and the black area is not selected. So that means the black area will not be subject to what we are about to do, whereas the outside, the border, is subject to a change we are about to perform. Now, what is the change we will be performing? It's basically, what we'll do is we'll be combining whatever colors we have here, whatever these blocky gray values are, we will choose a different color if we can find a different color that is darker. And where would that different color come from? Well, we can pick it from an alternate buffer, what we call the swap buffer. So we can actually do a composition or a combining, and if you scroll down here you can see that there's a whole group of options down here, combine with swap, and you could either do a mix buffer or you could do a transition, you can do a variety of other methods here, and you can see in the preview that it's only applying it to the outside border because the alpha channel, the selection mask, is preventing any work or any changes to the rest of it. It looks like I'm still a little bit off here. Oh yeah, it looks like I should actually transform that a little bit to the side. So let me undo that. Let me redefine this this selection. So let's go to the selection mask. There we go, rectangular. I had not seen that there is actually a little bit more room here on the right side, so this should be better. Let's select the invert and get alpha. There you go. So now we have a good copy of that. Alright, so what we need to do is use the combine with swap, and we want to do this in such a way that the color it will find in the swap buffer is darker than any color we have here, or perhaps equal to this one, but basically darker. If it is darker, use the one from the swap. If it is not darker, don't use it. Basically, there is an option here called combine. I thought there was greater than or less than, right? So if we say we need to use the one that's less than, if the swap buffer is less than if the color in the swap buffer is less than the color in the main buffer, then we want to use it. That means in order to actually make that work, we need to simply make sure that the swap buffer actually contains that darker color. So we have the darker color still selected here. If we didn't yet, we can pick it right there. Yep, this is the one. And then we can go perhaps with the fill tool, invert or swap to switch to the swap buffer there under image, and there's a swap buffer. So we're looking now at the content on the swap buffer. and go to the fill tool and fill it right in there. So that area now is all filled to the same gray value as we had around there in this area, but on the other buffer. So in this area now we have dark colors, and I believe they are darker than anything else. If we weren't sure, we could certainly just choose a different color. We could make it, no, we could make it black. So we could choose black as the erase color, and fill it with black, right? So then that would actually bring it down all the way to the bottom, to the lowest level for the elevation map. Yeah, why not? Let's choose that. And so now let's jump back with J for jump on the keyboard, or image right here, swap buffers, go back to the main buffer, and see what happens now if we say we want less than. There it is, combine less than. So what that does is it looks at the swap buffer and it combines it if the pixel on the swap buffer is less than the pixel in the main buffer. It does that on a per pixel basis. So every pixel it looks at will be compared to the pixel at the same position, at the same coordinate, but coming from the swap buffer. And that's how you can make sure that every color along this border around it is disappearing and turning to the color that's actually in the swap buffer. And so at this point we can go render that, and it will apply this black border, if you want, on the entire sequence. Now we can get rid of the Control D here to get rid of the selection, and perhaps we can also apply a little bit of a smooth if we don't want that blocky, very sudden transition. If we do something like a small Gaussian blur there, do a tiny little bit of that. Let's not do too much, just a little bit. So we have a little bit of a smooth transition on the edges. So from black it goes into gray, and then perhaps the next one is a little bit brighter gray. It won't be such a sudden jump. Let's go render that. And of course it renders that across the entire image sequence. And then at that point we're ready again. This is one where you may want to save that as well on the file. And then go to the filters and transform that into the 3D designer. And so now here we see that we do have, let's make the samples as fine as possible. You can see that there are some colors around it that are all black. Now if we change the color not from image but we use from the swap buffer, it will be all white. But if we do have the color coming in from the image, we can have it change based on the elevation. And now here's an interesting one, because that's something we will use in the next module, is basically to look at the image from the swap buffer and therefore perhaps colorize these blocks so that they are actually not only going up and down based on the brightness, but then we also colorize them based on the information that we have in the swap buffer. And so that will be the next step. For now we'll just use this method, and let's see what else we could do. Oh, perhaps one thing we could do for this one is, before we render that through the 3D designer, is also mirror it. Let's go a vertical mirror and rotate this around, so we now have them kind of turn onto each other. Perhaps increase the separation here, the elevation, change the scale or the distance a little bit. Yeah, you know what, that's a little bit confusing perhaps right now, because we haven't seen the effect of this transformation yet. So let's not do the mirror after all, and simply, oh wait, we have two mirrors going on here, X and Y. Well, maybe that's actually even better. That's where we will start to explore a little bit more of a different type of art. Let's go and keep it the way we had it initially intended. There you go. And you can see it from different side, from the top, from the bottom. Okay, and let's go render that again with the animation, but no need to change the angles necessarily. What we're interested in really is just to see how this entire object is changing over time with the elevation.